landscapes is a way of looking at the world that has received a lot of attention quite recently. It's actually a very old concept that has driven the way we investigate environments for many years. I recall having started work on landscape approaches to sustainable agriculture back about 1991, about 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. So it's not a new concept, and it has evolved from an earlier tradition, which is the management of watersheds, or the management of catchments. And that's where landscape approaches really do reach a concrete understanding, because everybody knows they live within a larger area than just their own town, their own village, their own farm. And those larger areas are landscapes. Now, landscape approaches are ways in which we formulate our questions, our challenges, from the perspective of what's going on across the entire area. That's the landscape. And landscapes, by their very nature, are usually diverse. They usually contain various different actors, various different types of settlement, various types of agriculture and forestry, and they are all blending together in a mosaic in a given area. That is the landscape. Now, landscape approaches then is our way of actually building the common understanding that is so important to be able to actually solve the problems that cannot be solved by any one actor, any one farm, any one enterprise, any one business in that area. But by realizing that these kinds of problems are problems that must be dealt with by competing, often very different actors, we need common frameworks for that, common systems of negotiating problems and solving them. And this has evolved over a long history of working with watersheds, working with catchments, working with river basins, and goes all the way back to the rich history of the soil conservation movement back in the early part of the last century. So our current understanding is certainly nothing new, but it is very fortunate that more and more different people are now capturing the importance of taking a landscape approach to complex problems. And when we deal with climate change, of course, this is the kind of scope that we need to use in order to deal with these problems, because these are problems that affect everyone across not only landscapes but the entire globe. And so landscape approaches is an intermediate stage of attacking these problems in a community way. It is really quite challenging to use a landscape approach to address these kind of quite big problems, wicked problems. And so in fact, yes, we need good examples of how investment in that type of problem solving has made a difference. I think of a couple of examples when I look to, how such an approach can make a difference. One is the importance that we have found in terms of giving communities a voice vis-a-vis their national governments in managing the watershed resources. Communities that live in watersheds that are affected by mismanagement of the land in those watersheds, being involved in negotiating solutions to their problems with government agencies that often aren't very responsive. And when I was in Indonesia, we worked for quite a number of years to develop what we called a negotiation support system to actually build a dialogue between the communities living in the watersheds in the island of Sumatra and the national government institutions that were managing the land, particularly the Forestry Institute or Forestry Department. And the people on the ground were never given a voice in managing forest resources, but they were the people who actually were there. They were affected by decisions made by the national government. And without having a dialogue between them, it was clear that there was no way of actually creating a better environment in these watersheds, because there was no way that the communities were in a position to follow the forestry regulations, and there was no way in which the Forestry Department could actually dialogue with the communities to solve the problems together. So this negotiation support system, which has now been institutionalized in Indonesia across the country, has made a huge difference from the initial tests that we did back in southern Sumatra in the late 1990s. And so we've seen that watershed approach, landscape approach, evolve into an accepted way in which communities and government could negotiate the management of resources in watersheds.